Hello and welcome to the South Wales coast, and in particular the stretch of it that runs between Colhew Beach and St Donat's. Today I'm going to be meeting up with the walkers doing the 10 Days in May walking festival all across the Vale of Glamorgan to tell them a little bit about this wonderful secluded spot. In particular, the tale of a hapless pirate by the name of Colyn Dolphin and how he met his doom in front of the cave on this beach. So where we are is called Tresilian Bay. It gets its name from a 4th century Welsh prince called Tresilian, and he had a court that is somewhere here. We're not exactly sure where it was, but plenty of remains have been found from that period by various archaeological digs, but exactly which one was his court we're not quite so sure. So that's where the name of this place comes from. If you follow the cliff line out towards the sea, you come to a cave, and that cave is called Reynolds Cave, and it gets its name from a rather wonderful bit of folklore. There used to be a legend, because as you can see the woods come right down to the beach here. There used to be a legend that a witch had turned a lady of high standing into a fox, and she was capable of occasionally taking human form to avoid being caught and hunted. And quite often you would see foxes on the beach, and that just kind of supported this old legend. So that cave is called Reynolds Cave. Reynolds is just a corruption of renard from the French word for fox, which dates back to that legend, which is probably from the 1500s. The legend, incidentally, was stolen by the people of St Donat's because it was originally about another fox in Porthkerry. So we'll let it go, but if it happens anymore, we will be having words. The building you see behind you may be a very elegant country house now, but back in the 16th and 17th century, this was a notorious inn. It was famous for pirates and smugglers used to use the cave as well, because they could row in on the high tide, deposit their booty, row out, and then people could walk down to go and collect it. But this place was really deeply seeded in all kinds of mysteries. And one of them concerns a man from Brittany in northern France, whose name was probably originally Colyn Dolphin. But because this is Wales, everyone called him Colyn Dolphin. So, which is nothing like as scary. Well, Colyn Dolphin was absolutely notorious. So a rash of ports sprung up very quickly on both sides of the Bristol Channel, and it made for really easy pickings. For pirates, and most of the pirates who operated in this area tended to have their hideouts on Lundy, which isn't that far away, in a boat, and Colyn Dolphin was one of the better known ones, and he came across a piece of luck one day when he was out in the Bristol Channel. There is a family that used to live in St Donat's Castle called the Stradlings. And the Stradlings were very wealthy, very influential, very powerful people. There's a chap called Harry Stradling, and he was the archetypal Hooray Henry. He loved to party, he loved to really push the boat out and overindulge himself. And he and a group of friends had been living it up at a big party over in Somerset, and were catching a boat back from Minehead back to Llantwit Major. But Colyn Dolphin intercepted the boat, not knowing he was on board. They were searching for whatever treasure they could find, whatever booty was worth confiscating. One of his crew recognized Harry Stradling, so they kidnapped Harry Stradling and they took him off to Lundy along with some of his party. They then issued a ransom note to the castle, and the ransom was so bit, and this bit we know for sure is true because there's historical record of this bit. The ransom was so absolutely massive that the Stradlings had to sell their estates in Gwent to raise the money to get him released, and it took them 3 years. So bear in mind how rich this family were. It took them 3 years to raise this money to get him released. So when he was released and he was brought back home, he was unharmed, he was so absolutely incensed by the indignity of having been kidnapped by Colyn Dolphin that he dedicated the rest of his life to catching him. And if you go to St Donat's Castle, you can still find the remains of the watchtower that he built so he could keep watch across the channel, keeping an eye out from his boat. Well, one day, news reached him that his boat had been spotted somewhere between here and Llantwit Major Colliw Beach. So he sent down a detachment of soldiers on horseback to try and intercept him. But when they got down here, his boat was abandoned, there was no one around, and the crew had scattered. So they started searching all around the area, rounding them up one by one. And one by one, they managed to catch them all, but the only one they couldn't find was the captain, Colyn Dolphin himself. Then somebody amongst the crew realised that, of course, this place was a notorious hideout for pirates and things like that, so they decided to question people down here. And some old soak let slip that he'd seen Colyn Dolphin running into Reynolds Cave to hide. So down came the soldiers, and sure enough, there he was. Now, he was as you can see, he was a pretty formidable man. So he saw off several handfuls of guards before they finally overpowered him. They beat, what we say in Wales, 7 bells out of him. And when he came to, and unfortunately the tide is out, which does destroy this legend a little bit. When he came to, he was buried up to his neck in sand. Now, beyond these rocks, there is sand, I promise you. But yeah, so the legend is he was probably a bit closer to the cave than he actually was. But when he came to, he was buried up to his neck in sand on the beach. And they'd constructed a scaffold, and he was powerless other than to watch as one by one each member of his crew was hung before him. And then came the final part of this act of cruelty, is as Stradling and his men retired back beyond the shoreline, because we have a huge tide here, as you probably know. It's the second biggest in the world. But he was just there, buried up to his neck in sand, watching the tide progressing closer and closer and closer towards him until he was completely submerged. And that is how they disposed of Colyn Dolphin.
There is a legend that is now told by seafarers in these waters, that on the darkest of nights, when the tide retreats beyond the cave, you can hear the cries of Colyn Dolphin screaming for mercy, until the last wave finally engulfs the point where he was drowned, and his voice is silenced once more.